we're going to continue to talk about one of the core issues of the change in the labor market, and that is the question of how do we get new knowledge, new skills, retraining, who has the model, who has the silver bullet, and who is going to pay for it. And we have, of course, some very qualified and interesting speakers, and we're going to begin with the Managing Director of the Danish Akademikerne, SINE SUNESEN. Thank you. And as I come from a white-collar union as well, the Swedish Association of Graduate Engineers, I gather that you have quite the same questions. People have invested in a long and thorough education already, maybe even 3 to 5 years, and now they're going to have to retrain several times during lifetime. Please, Sine.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for being invited today. I'm very pleased to be a speaker on this conference and to be able to share some of our thoughts with you, and also to be the voice of the professionals. It's not that often that you have that voice too in conferences like this one. We represent 360,000 members of academic unions, and we cover both public and private employees, students, and also some unemployed members. And for our members, it is crucial that we protect, of course, but also stand up for their rights for education now and in the future. So the question is not if education is needed, but of course it is needed for the preparation for the digital era. The question is how. I would also say that to start with, which is very important, that we understand digitalization as manifold changes that are likely to improve the quality and the productivity of services, society, and life. I think some other speakers today said that we left this gloomy view on digitalization, and so did we. But we must also say that changes are undoubtedly changing the future of jobs, and it's also changing the role of the unions, our role in society. In other words, we don't just see digitalization as an abstract. We see the changes coming, we see them right now, and here we have referred to this McKinsey review. I think that is one of the reviews that we all refer to for the time being, where we can see the changes coming very fast. And therefore we see it as an important role, a part of our role as union, to enhance the political will to strengthen the rights and opportunities for vocational training whenever needed. As said before, of course, education is the main key, but we ask ourselves for whom, why, and in which way. Those are the challenges we are trying to meet in my confederation right now in society, in order to keep up our standards as highly educated and employable employees, but also to keep up a flexible and secure labor market. So, the main objective of this presentation is thus to give you a glimpse of the challenges and means we undertake this moment to keep up with the digital development. I will present to you some considerations of what to keep, what to add, and also what to drop to prepare for the digital era. And I will also present to you a few examples of initiatives being put through recently. I can't tell you the results already because we just taken the initiatives recently, and they are all results of our central bargaining system that characterizes the Danish society and also your societies as well. The flexicurity approach has, you all know, and advantageous for both employers and employees. And we see it as an important part of the Danish, the Scandinavian welfare system, and has played a key role for many, many years. But this not said that the Danish model is invulnerable or static. The many balances between flexibility and security, which marks our society, must constantly be maintained, but of course also adjusted. And reforms can be well-founded. We've seen many examples of that in the Danish society, in the Scandinavian societies. But they can also damage if they are implemented in a rush or for ideological reasons without respecting the interaction between the different parts of the model, or even worse, if nothing is done to cope with the future. One of the main challenges for the time being is a lack of qualified workers with digital skills. A recently conducted Danish study showed that 17% of Danish companies have an educational strategy for their employees. But this, although only 16% of public IT managers, I would say also private IT managers and chief executives, estimate that their employees have the needed set of skills, the digital skills. And this just to underline that we strongly advocate for continuous investments in vocational education. And in that sense, I would like to point at this keep slide and give some aspects of our existing system. First and foremost, we have a well-founded education system which we need to maintain. It includes free and equal access to higher education. I think that in the last 10 years, we have seen some attacks on this model in Denmark, but I would say that also because of our role in society, until now we have succeeded in keeping the model with the free and equal access also for education at a university level. So we need to keep investing heavily in education to keep our global position and to ensure high quality also of our graduates. Secondly, we prepare for the digital development in regard of our members and in regard of our role as a union by enhancing the political will to strengthen the rights and opportunities for vocational education whenever needed. And I can assure you, this is not always approved by the politicians, many of them, and I see even more for the time being, would like to cut on the education budget. And thirdly, the two parties, employer and employee, should keep on collaborating, and I would say even better, improve the collaboration about the digital transformation. It is, of course, of both parts' interest that all employees stay flexible, attractive, and secure. Employees are still, and I hope they will be for many years, still the main resource of our society, not the robots. And we need to keep our focus on them and their needs to keep up the pace in the competitive global society. As Confederation of Professional Associations, we contribute to the political educational agenda, of course. Recently, and we've heard about it before, Anna mentioned it earlier, tripartite negotiations between the government and the unions and employers' association were undertaken concerning vocational education. And the settlement contained great investments, mainly for the unskilled and skilled workers. And I would say that from from my confederation, we strongly support these investments. But our ongoing challenge is to convince the central parties that not only unskilled and skilled workers need to train and upgrade their skills. Academics might not be, that's what we think today, as threatened as low-skilled workers, but they are still, or are just as much, a part of the digital transformation and need training to maintain the ability to solve problems in a creative and constructive way. High quality of academia's problem solving is crucial. Because it's not just a matter of being able to understand the digital technologies. It is perhaps merely a matter of being able to grasp the technologies in an analytical, critical, and creative manner. In other words, digital technology changes the type of skills needed to fulfill a task sufficiently. Thus, we need to add a broader understanding of the type and level of skills we need. And I must say, with regret, that we experience strong prejudice about academics being fully trained, fully adaptable to changes whatsoever, and with no or limited need of upskilling. It is as if we are told, you've already been given a university degree, why should you need more? So I would like to explain some of the initiatives that we have invested in recently, just to show you another picture of reality. There's a need of strengthening the connection between the competences of our graduates with the demand of the public and private companies and organizations. We see in Denmark a serious lack of specific IT skills right now, although we have several IT graduates that are unemployed. That seems as a paradox. So several questions remain unanswered. What are the current recruitment challenges? There might be many. Which competences are the companies struggling to find? And very important, how is the situation expected to develop in the next 10 to 15 years? And to solve this mismatch challenge, this paradox, we recently initiated a project concerning unemployed academic IT workers being upskilled to meet the specific demand of the companies. As a result, resources are allocated for job-specific courses to meet the demand of the private companies. The criteria for success of this project is to produce knowledge to answer those questions, and the project is financed by public funds. In connection to this project, partnerships between different private industries, universities, and the public sector are established. The partnerships are collaborating closely on solving the challenge of lack of digital skills by ensuring that the graduates meet the demand of the companies. So also, we need to strengthen the right to education for every individual. As a result of the collective agreements in the industrial sector, the private sector, every employee earns a certain amount of money every year, which is earmarked for education. And the same thinking goes for the public collective agreements that we are heading for this spring. So we are, as a union, demanding individual rights for education, and we need also in the collective agreements to emphasize the need of terms which ensure that every employee and employer talk about development in regard of the digital development. And the last slide I will show you is what to drop. Vocational education is a timely and smart investment we need to allocate resources for today. For the Danish labor market continuing being attractive, the initiatives need to be systematic, strategic, and also to embrace both the workplace and the career of each employee. Unfortunately, we experience that employers do not allocate time and resources for vocational education. There's a tendency towards that employers find it too expensive to allocate resources and perhaps also to allocate hours for the employee to attend courses to upgrade for his or her career. So to utilize the potential within digitalization, we need to think forward and drop this short-sighted solution to strengthen the access to education and ensuring competent employees throughout life is one of the most important investments in our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sine. Very interesting to hear about how you deal with these questions in Denmark. Do we have any questions from the audience? Then maybe I can start with one question.
Yes, you can.
Because amongst the professional organizations, there are usually people who are more or less freelancers. And in the future, maybe we will see more freelancer or independent workers. Have you any ideas about how they can be reskilled and their access to vocational education?
That is a large discussion in our confederation right now, because we see that tendency. It's not that we see that many being self-employed or freelancers, but we have some groups, the journalists, for example, and they have been freelancers for many years, and we can gain some experience from them. But what we discuss is that we need a kind of frame agreement with the private employers to assure that every individual, also the freelancers, and we don't have to discuss that much, are they freelancers or are they in this gray zone that Anna talked about earlier, they have the right to education and pension and other rights. And, well, maybe the pension fund should play a role there. I agree with Anna.
I know that some of the professional organizations in Denmark have courses for their members of their own.
Yeah.
Is that common amongst the...
Yes, and it's becoming more and more common, yes.
And is that something you get through your member fees, or is it...
To a certain degree, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yes, I would like to ask Sine which form of education she would prefer for academics, form of further training. Because when you ask high-skilled people, it's very different what they need of further training. This individual rights for further training academics that you want to bring into the negotiations in the public sector in the spring, do you have any demands or suggestions to the form of that? Should there be a freedom for the individual workers to choose which type of education that they need, especially for the high skill, because it's so different what they need?
Well, shall we repeat the question if somebody didn't hear? The question was about the form of education for the individual, since, for instance, highly skilled, but I can also imagine people with not high skills, that there are different demands for the form of education they need.
No, I can't say that we need this and that form of education, but what I can say is that what we need mostly is to get into ongoing dialogue with the employers. We have had that for many, many years on the education, for educational low-skilled and not skilled workers, but we don't find it the same committing dialogue on our level, and that is the first thing to be done, to have this dialogue, to get this dialogue, and then find out what will be needed, because you won't find that one size fits all, of course.
Any more questions? So, thank you very much.
Yes, down now.
Please keep your mic on, because I will want you on stage after the next speaker too. So, then we are to welcome Mr. THORBEN ALBRECHT, who is Permanent Secretary of State to the German Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs.
Thank you.
Very welcome, Mr. Albrecht. And you must permit me to be a bit personal here, because I was so happy when I saw you were coming, because the German government was a front runner in addressing the labor market issues connecting to Industry 4.0, and your minister actually published a white book about it called Arbeit 4.0, and now we're going to hear of some of the learning aspects in that. Please, Mr. Albrecht.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to present a bit of the results we had from a dialogue process we started nearly 3 years ago, with the simple question put at the beginning of it. And the question was, how do we want to work in the future? And that was important for us. If we talk about changes in the working life, changes due to technology, but also changes we could see coming from other developments, of course, demographic developments, globalization, or even a changing form of globalization, as I would put it, but also value change when you look at the values and preferences of workers. If you take all this into account, you get a much more holistic picture than just talking about digitalization and how will robots and algorithms change our working life. And so we try to get a broad picture, and we started with a green paper, putting up some trends and questions, and then we had an intense dialogue, of course, especially with the social partners, trade unions being very active, but also representatives of self-employed, but also with the public, with the citizens, to discuss all the questions about the future of work in its different forms. Always in a way saying, which future do we want? And there we have been very sure there is no technological determinism that tells us how we have to work in the future. So that was our starting point. And after 18 months of debate, we came up with a white paper which covers a whole range of issues, from new types of work, things in the welfare change that have to change, new arrangements for working time and working place. And if I had 2 hours, I could tell you all about it now. But here I want to concentrate on the issues that Zina already talked about, the questions about skills and qualification. And why is that so important? Because the largest fear we were confronted with was the fear that people will lose their jobs due to robots and algorithms. And this debate is around. It's very often pushed by media. But of course, there's some truth in it. But we wanted to look into it. Is this fear a real one? And if it's the case, how to deal with it? So we tried to work out, starting from these studies done by Karl Frey and Michael Osborne, who said that in the US, 49% of the jobs will be lost. If you put this to the German experience, it would be still 47% of the jobs, but we wanted to dig deeper into it. We talked with Karl Frey, for example, but we also made our own studies. And we said, well, these studies are looking at which jobs can be automated, meaning the majority of tasks that you're doing can be automated. But I think that was a bit too short looking at that, not digging deep enough. My favorite example is always the example of a school bus and the school bus driver. Yes, in a couple of years, probably it's possible that a bus goes along without any driver. But the first question is, will parents put their kids on a bus where there's no adult to take them to school? No. So there are some choices, customers' choices. A high-speed train running through Germany or through Sweden probably doesn't need an engine driver in the front of it already today. But people will not step into a train with no driver, at least not in many places. In some places it's already working, Copenhagen, the underground, for example. But there are some ethical questions around it, some question of choices. And then if you have a system of buses without drivers, there are still a lot of people in the background organizing the whole process, so new jobs are created as well. And we try to take these aspects into account also when looking at possible job losses and job gains. And we estimated for Germany, for the year 2030, what does it mean for different sectors in Germany. And the overall result was quite relaxing, saying it will be the number of jobs lost and the number of jobs gained will be more or less the same. No huge changes. Even if digitalization goes on more quickly, we might even have a positive effect. But then if you look into it, you can see that there's around 1 million jobs in Germany over this period of time that will be lost, or sectors will lose this kind of jobs, and other sectors will gain. There will be sectors like, of course, healthcare, education, where a lot of jobs will be created in the coming years in Germany. In other sectors, especially public administration, a lot of jobs will be lost. And this is looking only at the shifts between sectors. Of course, there will be shifts inside sectors, and there will be shifts in every single job you're doing. The tasks will change. I will talk about that later. And we looked at a period of time until 2030. So this is not too long in the future. In fact, this change is described there, affect every worker that is 55 or younger. So whole generations of workers, not only the youngsters getting into the labor market now. So these results were mixed. Not a dystopia, not a fear that there will be no work at all, but huge changes, that is what we are estimating. And of course, if you look at what makes workers to keep their jobs, skills and qualifications are at the center. The question is, what kind of jobs are more endangered through automatization, and which jobs will even be an opportunity to have a better job in the future, a more intelligent one, a more satisfying one. And if you look at the international debate, you can always see a debate around there will be a polarization of the labor market. The middle-skilled jobs will be automated away, they are in the manufacturing, and the low-skilled jobs are too cheap to be automated, so they will stay, and the high-skilled academic jobs will stay too. I'm neither sure whether that is true for countries like Germany, and probably for the Nordic countries as well, nor am I sure if I want this kind of future, because polarization means more inequalities and means dangers for our societies. I think the good thing about countries like the Nordic countries and Germany is that through our vocational training systems, through our rather high-skilled, middle-skilled workers who are not academics, they have shown they are very adaptable over the past years. So I think with the right retraining qualifications, we might keep these jobs. But on the other hand, the low-skilled jobs are not as low-paid as they are, for example, in the UK or in the US. We have either, like in the Nordic countries, still working collective bargaining systems, or we have systems that are mixed, like in Germany, with collective bargaining that is bolstered up with a statutory minimum wage. So I'm much more afraid about low-skilled workers in our countries to lose their job than the middle skills, but with the middle skills we have to take action too. If you look at the middle skills, and Sina said that already, I think it's important that we not talk only about IT skills. It will be much more. The most impressive example, and I try to travel around Germany a lot to look at factories and visit workplaces, was Intel factory near Dresden, where their computer chips are produced. And they have a modern production site where you have a factory hall where the chips are produced, where there's no worker on the floor in the middle of the factory and at the machines. But there are still the same number of people working there, but they are just outside controlling the process. And with the Works Council I discussed, and they monitored this change a lot. Before this automation, 50% of the tasks the workers were doing was feeding the machines. And this has completely disappeared. But the task people do now is organizing the processes, oversee it, overlook it, and do maintenance when needed. So the level of skills, the workers, and that are all middle-skilled, vocational training, skilled workers, the skills needed have completely changed. And not only using IT, but also holistic thinking, and also social skills, because a lot of things can be automated, but not talking to each other. Of course, machines can talk to each other in a certain way, but there are limits to that. And of course, especially in fields like education and healthcare, there are great limits to that. I think empathy cannot be automated, and there are some strengths of human beings that are still in the center. So we have to have a holistic approach on what skills are needed. So what are the findings, what we thought, what has to change? What do we need in the future if we want to skill the low-skilled to a higher level so they can still participate in the labor market in the future and are not left behind? And how does the retraining, especially of the middle skills, but also of the higher skilled workers, has to come along? And Jenny, I think in the very beginning of the question said, and who pays for it? And I think that is a crucial question. We have to answer that. And we come up with to put it a bit simple, threefold answer. The first one is the companies are still in charge. For all the changes inside the companies, the management has to pay because they make their profit out of the good qualifications of the worker. The problem we face here is, at least in Germany, the low-skilled participate less in retraining and requalification than the high-skilled. But they are the ones that need it most. So how can we overcome that? Of course, there has to be a change in the mindset of the management, but I'm not always convinced that that comes by itself. So in Germany, we're discussing that we have to strengthen workers' representatives' rights, works council's right to determine the ways retraining in the companies is done. So that is the first level where we have to make sure that nobody's left behind. But then there, of course, are certain workplaces, and that is especially when it comes to routine tasks. And routine tasks does not only mean manual routine tasks, but also routine tasks you do with your brain, in accounting, etc. That can be easily automated. And there will be people that will lose their jobs or are endangered to lose their jobs, and we need an answer to that. So what we worked out is asking us the question, we have an unemployment insurance in Germany, which is working quite well, but it usually works the way you get unemployed, then you are paid for your living, and in the best case, you also get a qualification. Shouldn't we be much more preventive in our labor market policies? And we discussed this inside the unemployment insurance in Germany. The unemployment insurance is paid by the workers and the employers and a bit by the state, so we have a tripartite governing body there. And our idea is the government, supported by the unions, a bit reluctant with the employers yet, was that at the first place we want to counsel workers. So if you are in doubt whether your skills are still valid and will earn you a living in 10 years, you can go to the employment services and get a counseling. Do you need some retraining? And this is being implemented in Germany now next year all over the place. The second issue we have to do, and we are working on that too with the unemployment insurance, but also with the government, we really need more knowledge what kind of skills in which regions of the country, in which sectors are needed. So we have to get into this monitoring of skills need much more intensely and much more systematic. And the third step, and I think that would be the crucial one, for me would be that the unemployment insurance can already pay qualifications for workers who are endangered to lose their jobs before they get unemployed. Why should we let people get into unemployment? That's always a huge psychological problem. You have to pay for the living of the workers. We can do this already when we know that some jobs are endangered. And that can be paid by the unemployment insurance because it's an investment that pays off. So that is our major proposal on this level. But then, the third level company level unemployment insurance, is the individual worker. He or she also has to look at qualifications. That's why the counseling I mentioned is important. What we say, as retraining gets more and more important, and we can see that possibilities are unequally distributed, why shouldn't we give, if a young person starts into her or his working life, shouldn't give him or her what we call an opportunity account? Certain sum of money which can be used for retraining over the working life or used to change from employment to self-employment, setting up a business, and this kinds of changes in working life. And with this opportunity account, we could get much more equality in chances for your working life. So there are 3 ideas we developed in this field of the skills. There are probably more around, but I think we have to at least tackle these levels: companies, the social scene, the welfare system, and the individual world, and supporting individuals going through these working lives to make sure that the changes we're facing are done in a way that we do not leave people behind. Because I'm not afraid that there will be no jobs in the future, but I'm afraid that people are left out, and that's what we have to prevent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Albrecht. This seems like pure Shangri-La to me. And I would like to give you a first question, and that is, have you had a dialogue with the employers about this, these plans of yours?
Yes, the employers have been both involved in the general dialogue process, Arbeiten 4.0, Work 4.0 we did, and of course in the governing body of the unemployment insurance. And there we are still not there yet. The counseling I mentioned is already agreed upon with the employer's support, but with the real training, employers say, well, don't take it away from us. The unemployment insurance is not able to do the right training. We had that already. They train, if there's a fashion to be a web designer, they train everybody to be a web designer. So I think we have to answer this question. It's a serious one. That's why we also do need this monitoring of skills needed. So I still hope that the employers will get on board over the next debates, and there have been a lot of workshop debates inside the unemployment insurance governing bodies. So I hope they will support this. The idea of the opportunities account is not supported by the employers, but that is a distribution question. Of course, you need some taxes, and we propose the heritage tax to use for that, because we said heritage should be distributed more evenly. So if somebody inherits a lot, he can give something to give it to the common good. So that is, of course, a distribution political question in the end.
Thank you. Very interesting ideas. Now I would like to invite Sine to come up and join us, and I would like to ask some questions of both of you, and then I will leave the word to you. And first of all, I would like, because you said that unemployment assurance could take care of retraining some people who would be out of work, and you said that many companies did not give vocational education, though they should. And I think that is the case in Sweden as well, because we have good phrases about vocational training and education in our collective agreements, but it just doesn't happen. Because when it's when the companies are low, they don't have the money, and when it's high, they don't have the time. Have you been discussing this with the employers, is my question to you, and what did they answer?
Yes, we have. And when we discuss it with them, recently I discussed it with the managing director of the biggest employers organization in Denmark, and he said, well, while we ask our members, the CEOs, the managers, they say, well, if our employees, they need training, they will get it. So that's not the problem. And I think in many cases it's true. The problem is that we don't have this market that I spoke about before for training for the many. Of course you can send some of the few privileged employees to international business schools or whatever, but we have to build up the market, and the only way I can see that we can build up this market for further education also for the highly skilled, is that we have this binding, committing dialogue between the employers and the employees also on a central level. And I must say that we still have to wake up the employers to be committed to that dialogue. And I also think that the large companies in Denmark, the municipalities, the government, they must be the avant-garde in playing that leading role and yes, enter into this committing dialogue with us.
I think in Germany it's discussed on two levels. One is the collective bargaining level and one is the political level, and they have to interact. And the metal workers' trade unions, they did a collective agreement about retraining rights workers then get. And I think that's the right approach. And we try to support this with changing the law, for example, facilitating it for people that are no youngsters. The usual limit would be 25 now, but between 25 and 35 to get a vocational training if they haven't done it in their young years, because we have people that are non-skilled, still earn some good money in some sectors, but in the long term they're of course in danger to lose their jobs. So we said that we need some initiatives to do vocational training in companies, but with some public support in this age group to make sure that vocational training, if it's not done by the companies alone, then they get some support.
And does anybody have the silver bullet to how we do when we have good writings about vocational training, but it just doesn't happen? Can I have a comment on that? No.
I would like to hear it.
We need that answer. Mike?
We are having a discussion with the government right now in Sweden about the problem is not only the possibility to go to an education. Very many of the people who need the education are also mothers and fathers, so they can't afford to go to education. So we are actually talking with the government now to open up unemployment benefit system so you could study on 80% of your former salary. That would be a very good incentive for adults to go to better training in life, and they are not saying no so far. So we will continue to stress that with the government in the spring.
And I would say there you can find inspiration in the Danish agreement and the tripartite, the newly accepted agreement. But it's also only for people with a collective agreement. That's a problem for us. 50% of all the academics in Denmark, they work in the private sector, and I would say out of those 50%, only about 10% are covered by a collective agreement. And it makes it much more difficult to find solutions when you can't make them collectively.
And that was actually my next question, that we think that labor market in the future will have maybe more atypical contracts, shorter contracts. Yes. People will be more freelancers, as we talked about before. And what about them? If you took the journalists, but I mean, if I'm an engineer and I work as a freelancer, as a consultant, then every hour counts. And who will pay for my retraining if I need to learn a new programming language or something? How do we?
But I think we have to discuss within the unions that maybe we can't find the solutions within the framework of what we call the Scandinavian model. We also need the governments to commit themselves even stronger, perhaps also with legal solutions to cover the whole labor market.
But we're very worried about that because we don't want to give them a more...
No, not only if they're doing the right things.
But how have you discussed in Germany about people being freelancer and self-employed and their reskilling?
We always tried, when we talk about the measures done by the state, to incorporate all kind of workers and forms of work. So this opportunities account I mentioned would be there for anybody working also self-employed. And we are also in a discussion process when it comes to the unemployment insurance, but that is a tricky issue. I think the counseling on qualifications could be done for everybody, but giving a self-employed really unemployment benefits is a different thing, because then you would take the economic risk from an entrepreneur to the unemployment insurance. That doesn't work. But we are in a bit in the same situation. What we're trying to do when we will need some additional action by the state, I think, and by the public side. But we have to be careful that this is not weakening collective agreements. Because, of course, the situation of collective agreements is already weaker in Germany than it is in the Nordic countries. But there's also the argument now with this flexible working life with no one-size-fits-all solution, the time for collective agreement is over. I think it's the opposite. You can be much more flexible with collective agreements, so we're trying on other issues like working time, etc., rather to giving more space to collective agreements and saying if you don't have an agreement, then you have to follow strict rules. And so I think you're right. When it comes to new forms of employers, for example, if we talk about platforms, etc., we will have to find ways to force them to contribute to education systems, etc. We cannot just say, well, you're out of the box, we don't care. If there's no employer, in most cases there's somebody at least who has a similar role than an employer. And we have that, for example, in the arts in Germany, where people are not employer, but are buying in, for example, journalistic articles, etc., and then they have to pay contributions for social security and training issues.
And you were also talking about wanting to strengthen the workers' representatives in the companies to make sure that the least skilled got their training as they should. Can you explain a bit more about that? And also, what have the companies been saying about that?
They are generally very reluctant, to say the least, when it comes to giving more rights to the works councils. But I think we really need a right for an initiative in the field of qualification and in shaping the qualification programs of companies. And that has to be an entitled right, not just a negotiation right, but there has to be some measures that makes it possible for Works Council to say, well, you have to do something for this kind of group. But that is a political decision that has to be taken, because the employers will not agree by themselves.
What is your reaction to that?
I think you can find a lot of dialogue on company level between employees, organized or not organized, and the managers. But Denmark is characterized of a lot of small and medium-sized companies, and I don't think they have the size or the resources to do. They have the dialogue, but what do? They don't have the possibilities to act that much, and I would like to make a parallel between the pension funds that we have built up over 20, 30 years in Denmark, which also have members being self-employed, freelancers, and what I see could be one of the solutions to build up competence funds that could cover the most of the labor market, also people without any kind of collective agreement.
That's an idea we also have in a similar direction, to have, for small and medium-sized enterprises, have competence centers, regional ones, that give the small and medium-sized companies first the knowledge they need. What skills will be needed? A large company can imagine in 10 years' time, I need this kind of qualifications. The small companies probably can't. And also when they can train on certain crafts and technology, but for example, not on IT issues and some other issues. And there we want these competence centers to help small and medium-sized companies to do that and qualify their workers.
Very interesting. Do we have questions, please? Yes, Deborah?
I was interested in your comment, Thorben, that employers say, well, why is the uninsurance service
training people to be web designers. We don't need web designers. You keep hearing so much about the skills mismatch. And there's something that doesn't sit right about that. But I wonder what your thoughts are about how much of an issue this is, and why, if it is an issue, why is it happening?
I think the problem is that real knowledge about the skills needed is not around. I mean, and I just said large companies know what skills they need. If you look into large German companies, I'm not sure if even all of them know what is needed. That is why we really try to establish now this monitoring. Also, in Germany we have a skills gap that is merely regional. You will find the skills you need in the south, you will find in the north there are still people unemployed. So you really have to look at regional issues there. And of course it has to be a mix of data, but you can also use big data analytics to monitor what is happening, at least what is happening, and then there has to be a certain amount of forecast to come to the conclusion which sectors really need which skills. But very often a local chamber of commerce or craft chamber doesn't even know how many pupils are leaving school in the next school year. So it's sometimes very basic information that is not around and which should be possible to accelerate in the coming years.
And I would like to comment on what you said, that big companies maybe know, or maybe it was you, big companies maybe know what's needed, but they obviously don't, because we can see Ericsson laying off hundreds of people and then buying new ones directly from university. And I ask myself, that guy who built that technology, why can't he be trained and build the next generation of that technology?
Yeah, I can't give you the answer, but we are trying to learn from this initiative I told you about, that we have this paradox about a lot of IT graduates being unemployed, and we also have companies screaming for competences in the IT field. And yeah, maybe we will become wiser.
Well, maybe it's also the kind of short-sightedness in business nowadays that demands immediate profits. You don't really have the time to think and retrain people.
That is part of the explanation, that you need competences here and now.
Yeah.
And they all, you could say, they're all fishing in the same pond, searching for the same competences that the companies need now. Yeah. And they don't have the time to think about what do we need in 3 years or in 5 years.
Other questions, please? Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Hans Kotsan. I work at the Swedish Municipal Workers Union. I have a question for you, Mr. Albrecht, and also I believe you, Ms. Sunesen, also raised the issue. You said that the digitalization was a sort of less effect towards the high-skilled workers. Now, one of my colleagues, Mr. Fredrik Söderqvist, said that today it's quite easy to replace managerial staff with sort of an algorithm. Now, my question to you is which type of high skills work is not will we not be able to substitute with the algorithm? Because when I have discussions with some of my colleagues, always the academics seems to, hide themselves behind something, especially the language. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, of course, it's very hard to forecast over all sectors, etc. But I think the general answer would be the less routine work it is and the more social work it is, then it's less risky to automation. And as I said, we are estimating that, for example, in public administration, a lot of jobs will be automized and will be lost, and there will be jobs also done by academics to some extent. But I think always when it has to do with people-to-people communication, this stays. We had a very interesting talk to an insurance company in Germany, and they said already now, if you have a car accident and you write your, fill in the form and you send some photos you do with your mobile phone, already now 30% of the cases and the decision whether something is paid by the insurance or not is done by algorithms only. And this can rise up to probably 80% in the coming years. But to telling people the result, especially the bad result, if you don't get money but still want to keep them in the insurance, there you need people still. And I think a lot of is true also in a lot of jobs where you rather have to organize processes and have this people-to-people communication. There the risks are much lower. But I think academics do have some advantage, at least should have, because their adaptability very often is higher than especially low-skilled or non-skilled workers who learned a certain task, and if this task is automated, they cannot change so much. That doesn't mean, as Sina already said, that academics do not need requalification. They need it too. But the adaptability, I think, in general is higher. So the chances are better, but also there you cannot just wait and see it, but you have to take action.
Well, yeah, I think that is true, but the answer is that we don't know who's threatened mostly in longer term. And I would also like to comment on, I think you, Deborah, mentioned the Disruption Council settled in Denmark. That I would like to comment on that because my confederation are not represented in this council, which is quite strange. It's only the low-skilled workers' organization being represented there. So it's seen from a more who's threatened perspective than how can we all gain from digitalization perspective, which is sad. I think I would like to comment on that since you mentioned it in your presentation. Right now we see that some of the large law companies, law firms, they buy some of those supercomputers that can do the legal analysis. And is that threatening the lawyers? Well, I don't think so. We don't see signs of that now, but we don't know. When my kids, they ask me what to study, what is needed in the future, maybe you could, I'm not answering that, but maybe I could answer, well, study something with not too many rational choices. I mean, we all make rational choices, but not purely rational educations. Maybe you should study humanities, but because what we all want is that we benefit from the possibilities of the new world. So we still have the coherency, we still have a good life, and maybe humanists are better in doing that.
Well, that's quite a hopeful conclusion to this little debate. Thank you very much, Torben and Sina. And now we are actually having kind of a short break to await the others who will come from beyond and sit down with us. And then there will be a short session, and then you will have coffee. Okay? Thank you.